Imagine dedicating your entire life to a single, ancient historical narrative, only to uncover physical, archaeological evidence that shatters the whole official story. Right before the truth comes to light, well, that's exactly what we're digging into today. Welcome to this highly suspenseful study of history and archaeology. We're looking at a deeply held narrative packed with groundbreaking data from our source channel designed to unravel a paradox that's been hiding in plain sight for millennia. We're talking about a monumental political and theological cover-up surrounding a sacred relic. But what exactly is this relic, and why is its true history so dangerously obscured?
Picture this. Millions of people, literally weeping, fighting through crushing, desperate crowds, pushing with every ounce of their strength, just to kiss a silver-encased black stone. Why? To completely erase their sins. This is the absolute climax of their spiritual journey, a ritual supposedly handed down directly from Abraham to wipe out paganism. It seems to make perfect theological sense, right? But when researchers finally track down where the data suggests that stone actually came from, that's when they realized the official story was hiding a fatal historical secret.
You know the traditional claim, right? Islamic tradition famously states that this black stone used to be whiter than snow, but it literally turned black by absorbing the sins of mankind over countless generations. So we have an earthly object physically acting as a sin absorber, which immediately forces us to ask, how on earth does this fit into a religion based on strict monotheism? I mean, attributing divine saving powers to a physical rock vehemently violates their core rules against idolatry. Unpacking how an explicitly anti-idolatry faith centered its whole universe around a sin-forgiving rock is wild. But it leaves us with an even crazier question. What exactly does this massive, supposedly heavenly artifact look like beneath its heavy silver frame today?
Well, let's look at the geographical puzzle first. The traditional texts insist Abraham built the Kaaba and Mecca. But here's the catch. Historical and archaeological records firmly place Abraham thousands of miles to the north, up in places like Iraq and Jerusalem. So how could he possibly have built a sanctuary in a barren southern desert that, according to researchers, didn't even exist on maps at the time? The geographical math here is severely fractured, and actually, the evidence was pointing directly to a totally different ancient metropolis, a revelation that would soon turn the entire standard historical narrative completely on its head. Little did they know, the most shocking piece of this puzzle was still to come.
Section 1. The Sin-Forgiving Stone.
Okay, think about it. In any strict monotheistic framework, forgiving sins is a job entirely and exclusively reserved for God alone, right? So relying on a physical, earthly object for salvation, that's literally the exact hallmark of the ancient paganism this faith supposedly wiped out. And it gets crazier. Despite its grand reputation, this revered black stone, it's not some massive heavenly boulder. It's actually just 3 small pebbles, roughly the size of coins, held together by a massive glob of thick tar. Seeing millions strive for salvation from 3 pieces of broken gravel solves the mystery of what the stone looks like today, sure, but it instantly begs a new question. Who violently shattered this sacred relic in antiquity, and for what calculated purpose?
This leads us to a massive theological contradiction at the core of this study. On one side, you have strict monotheism, known as Tawhid. On the other, you have stone veneration, which looks exactly like shirk, the absolute unforgivable sin of idolatry. By definition, a religion that fought bloody wars to purify the world of idols somehow placed a physical stone at the absolute center of its holiest ritual. Researchers argue this is fundamentally indistinguishable from ancient pagan idol worship. Recognizing this blatant similarity between the faith's foundational rules and its real-world practices demands we figure something out. If these deeply ingrained physical rituals weren't born in the southern desert, where were they genuinely copied from?
To figure out where these rituals really originated, researchers like Dan Gibson dug into some groundbreaking directional evidence. They looked at qiblas, or prayer directions, of the absolute earliest mosques from the 7th and early 8th centuries. The architectural data is stunning. It definitively proves that early believers pointed their prayers entirely away from Mecca, aiming directly toward a completely different northern sanctuary. Now that revelation solves our initial geographic mystery, but it immediately unleashes a terrifying new question. Who on earth possessed the absolute unquestioned authority to manually shift the focal point of an entire global faith decades after it started?
Section 2. The Petra Connection.
Let's look at the timeline. Historical and archaeological sources strongly point to Petra, a highly sophisticated Nabatean city famous for its tombs, temples, and abundant water, as the true original sanctuary. We're talking the location of the first Kaaba, the original Zamzam well, and the original mountains of pilgrimage. But in the late 7th century, this original sanctuary got caught up in a massive violent civil war within the Umayyad Empire. Religious authority was shifting, and the holy sites were thrown into absolute chaos. Little did they know, a fleeing rebel in 680 AD had just stolen the very artifact that would change the course of history. But we'll get to that. Tracking this volatile timeline shows us exactly when the geographical shift from Petra to Mecca began, yet this massive relocation leaves us wondering, how do you physically pack up an empire's holiest artifacts and move them without inciting a mass revolt among the faithful?
Section 3. A trail of stolen relics.
The historical sources suggest there's a literal trail of stolen relics orchestrated by warring caliphs. It starts with that rebel, Ibn al-Zubayr, physically hauling the black stone south to escape the Umayyad armies in Damascus. But when you zoom out and map the broader architectural and ritualistic thefts, the data is mind-blowing. It clearly shows that the Islamic mountains of Safa and Marwa are actually just linguistic Arabizations of Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah over in Jerusalem. Proving that these sacred sites are merely borrowed terminology answers the riddle of their names, for sure, but it instantly plunges us into a deeper mystery. How many other foundational doctrines were lifted straight from the ancient biblical world and totally rebranded for a new empire?
There's also this totally fascinating linguistic and architectural link proposed by the data. The word Kaaba, it literally translates to cube in Hebrew. This directly mirrors the original cube-shaped Holy of Holies located on the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. And get this, that is exactly where the practice of counterclockwise circumambulation originated. Ancient Jews used to circle their holy sites 7 times to commemorate Joshua at Jericho. Tracing the geometry, the names in these circular rituals right back to the Jewish temple reveals the undeniable origins of the defining Hajj ritual. But finding that out just leaves investigators scrambling to understand, how did a 7th century empire successfully mask this massive cultural appropriation from the very populations they had just conquered?
And the investigation goes even deeper when you analyze the rest of the Hajj rituals, exposing just how actively and recently constructed this tradition really is, according to the source material. Take the Jemarat, for example, the stoning of the devil pillars. The narrative for this was abruptly changed from 1 pillar to 3 pillars as recently as 1980. Why? Purely for modern crowd control. It completely proves that these sacred traditions are not some rigid, ancient divine commands. Realizing that these traditions are constantly shifting to fit modern logistical and political needs resolves the mystery of their fluid form today. Yet it opens up a sprawling, highly controversial debate. How many fundamental doctrines were completely invented centuries after the fact, just to serve earthly political ends?
Section 4. The idolatry paradox. This brings us right back to the core philosophical conflict within the researcher's analysis. We have an expanding empire that violently opposed paganism in its texts, yet somehow ended up adopting the most overtly pagan elements of its conquered neighbors. Think about the definition of shirk, the absolutely unforgivable sin of idolatry, or associating earthly partners with God. The strict parameters of this doctrine force the narrative to confront a terrifying reality. Making a physical rock the literal source of spiritual forgiveness appears to directly violate the religion's most sacred, foundational rule. It's a staggering theological hypocrisy, one that forces researchers to look completely beyond the text to find the calculated, real-world political motive operating behind the curtain.
And this is where all the conflicting evidence in our study today comes to an absolute boiling point. We now know the researchers claim the stone wasn't originally from Mecca, and we've tracked the fleeing rebel who physically brought it there. But here is the ultimate question. Who actually benefits from enforcing this ancient veneration on the masses, and what happens to the global geopolitical landscape when billions of people discover the findings of this historical investigation? The unmasking of the Umayyad Empire's true political motives is about to reveal a historical narrative so vast it threatens to redefine our entire understanding of the ancient world.
Section 5. The historical truth revealed.
To truly understand this monumental shift, the data suggests we have to look closely at the early Arab warlords, specifically Caliph Abd al-Malik. He desperately needed a unique Arab identity to legitimize his sprawling new rule over massive Christian and Jewish empires. As Arabs, they lacked their own unique prophet, scripture, and central sanctuary. They absolutely required a manufactured, distinct identity to survive politically against the Trinitarian rivals. The study points to a devastating absence of Mecca on any early maps until 741 AD, and it notes that the word Muhammad actually started merely as a title, meaning the praised one, originally used by Christians to describe Jesus. This provides staggering archaeological evidence that the religious identity was constructed decades after the empire was already established, which brings us to the ultimate inescapable conclusion of this millennia-old cover-up.
According to these researchers, all the puzzle pieces finally snap together to suggest a religion forged in bitter political conflict rather than divine revelation. Think about it. The stolen stone from Petra, the rebranded Jewish rituals of Jerusalem,
and the fabricated geography of a barren southern desert. All of it served a singular purpose: to build the Umayyad and Abbasid empires' unique identities out of the ashes of older conquered faiths. Grasping this vast political engineering solves the mystery of the empire's rapid unification, for sure, while leaving us staring into the void, wondering exactly how much of modern history is still being actively manipulated by ancient political strategies.
So if the origins of the holiest site in the world are wrapped in political myth, dramatic reinterpretation, and stolen relics, what else in the tradition deserves closer scrutiny? When a towering ancient history is unmasked by the very stones it stands upon, we absolutely must challenge ourselves to question our inherited beliefs. The data presented in this study provides profound answers about the past, but ultimately it leaves us with a lingering hunger to investigate history further, no matter how uncomfortable the truth may be.
If you want to dive deeper, you have got to watch the full source on the Events and History channel. The link is right down in the description box below. I want to emphasize that this was an impartial study of the incredible material from the Events and History channel, so please go check out their groundbreaking work. Also, the Gospels Compared channel says prayers for the Watchmen channels are very much appreciated, and give a hype and like, please. Finally, a massive big thanks for the Gospels Compared members for helping this channel produce fruit. Keep questioning everything, keep digging into history, and I'll see you in the next study.